Hello fellow woodworkers and welcome to this week's edition of the Garage Workshop, and this week we're going to be changing this rotating cart into... Roll the intro. So I made this rotating cart last year, and I have to be honest with you, I've never been very happy with it. It's too wonky. I don't like the way it's fixed. I don't think it's sturdy enough, which I can't cure because the sheer nature of the rotation means that you can't put any struts across, and if you do, it needs to be a bigger. It's just not a great unit. So in this video, I'm going to go for something completely new, completely different, a bespoke rotating cart of sorts that matches my needs. Now, I've got an idea in my mind, which I'm actually going to commit to sketch up because I want to get it right. I'm not only involving a rotation, but also involving some interchanging of different tools. So the first thing I want to do is take all this apart. Let's see what wood we've got from here, and then let's talk about the design and how it's going to work. I should start by saying that this is a two-part video for a very, very specific reason. This turned out to be a ginormous, sprawling build, which was far bigger than the scope I originally anticipated it when I first had this idea in my mind. So sit back for two really, really big videos. So I'm sure you've had projects at home which when you've started, you had a very clear idea in your mind of how it was going to look and how it was going to turn out. And at the point I'm doing this commentary for the first video, I haven't actually finished this project yet. But what I can tell you is it was far more complicated, far more detailed, and involved a lot of techniques that I've never used in any build before, hence the reason there's two. But the first stage, as with most of my builds, was to take apart something which I'd earlier made a mistake with, and this cart was never ever going to do the job I wanted it to do. As I said, it was just nowhere near strong enough. Far too rickety, and obviously when you're doing things like using a bandsaw on it, which is what's on part of it, or a drill press, the last thing you need, particularly with a bandsaw, is to have any sort of wiggleness in it, and there was a lot in this. So the first thing I did was take apart absolutely everything. There's two reasons. Number one, I wanted to see what spares I could take forward, and the second thing obviously was to recycle or scavenge as much wood as I can from this bench. But as you'll later see, that the latter wasn't very successful. There wasn't a lot of usable wood. So first thing I did was break down the entire thing from start to finish. So with the breakdown of the cart completed, I then went on to the next stage, and I think probably the easiest way for me to explain this was, in my mind I sort of created two imaginary boxes that the miter saw and drill press would be in. So the pieces of wood that you can see there are just sort of to give me an idea in my mind of the depth I needed to make sure that it wasn't too shallow one end or too narrow on the other. So I got some really accurate measurements, and you won't see it on this because obviously you don't want to sit through everything, but I did check this 3 times. I then went to B&Q to get a piece of plywood. I initially just wanted a half or third piece, I think, but the price of it was 20 something odd pound, and a full sheet was only £40. And just out of interest, I know I've got quite a few viewers in the US, I just checked, and from what I can see, this equivalent piece of plywood is now $60 in the US for an 8x4 sheet, which is the same length that this was, and you can see the wood in the back, which I'm going to use in an upcoming project, but I just thought it made more sense to get a whole sheet. So with the right size cut at the bottom now, the base, I'm just going around and putting on an edge. I'm using 12mm plywood for the edge. I'm not going to encase it in 12mm plywood, but I wanted that to be the sort of baseline size, so I just drew that on 3 of the 4 sides. I then used my carpenter square to get a 12mm line all the way around the edge. Even though this was a cut on the big cutting machine they have in B&Q, which is where I bought the wood, it was very rough. I'm surprised actually, because the initial piece of plywood I picked The edge was really straight and really proper, I know, because I took about 3 sheets off to get to the one that I wanted, which didn't please the people working in there. I then picked up the stud timber. Now, this is the entire inside construction, the structure, the framework of this unit is made from CLS timber. Now, this gave me the advantage and disadvantage similarly. It's really, really difficult to get a piece that is straight all the way through, but it is a very cost-effective way of buying it, because I think these were £4 something, I think. I then ran it through the table saw, and all of the cuts you'll see on the table saw here, including this funky new angle I've got, by the way, all of the cuts you'll see on the table saw here are in 2 stages, 2 very deliberate the stage. This first one, I'm literally just cutting about maybe 2 mil, I think, deep, and I'm just literally cutting off the curve edge that this stud work timber has. And when I run it through the table saw, I'm being incredibly careful, especially as I'm going sort of against or going with the grain here. I just wanted to be really, really careful, bearing in mind the trouble I've had before with stud work timber. So I just literally knocked off a trim either side, made sure it was right, and then it gave me the opportunity to sort of start from a free piece of wood, which I then cut down to the right size. So the strategy at this stage wasn't to cut every single piece of wood I had. What I did was I cut down enough of the whole sections of the stub timber that I thought I would have enough for what I needed. And as this was a build on the fly, when I'd sort of done my final measures, I thought this unit is far, far too big. It doesn't need to be as wide as I had it. It was wide enough for what I needed it to do. I then got the pieces of wood, and I now am cutting them all in half and getting them the right width. It gave me a sort of just over a 4 centimetre or sort of 2 odd inch strip by the time it was all cut to size. When I was happy with the measurements, I just secured the sort of holding piece of wood at the back, which was going to be my sort of placeholder, if you like, and I then started running all the pieces of wood again through the table saw. As you can see, I'm adjusting it there to first of all take the edges off and then cut it down to the size that I needed it to be for the build. So when the wood was cut, I just got some more tape and started taping all of these struts in the right place. I'm very conscious that in my videos normally I don't tend to show you this stuff, but trust me, I do it, just like all the big woodworkers do on YouTube. So I got all of the pieces laid out exactly where I wanted them to be for the right lengths. You can see I'm doubling up there because that's sort of top and bottom of the strut, and I just attached some double-sided sticky tape and just lined them up with the 12mm line that I had done, that you saw me do earlier on. When all 3 were in place, it also gave me an opportunity to mark the inside, and for the middle post I marked obviously both sides, so when I came back to put the wood in later and when I came back to fix it into the correct place, I got all the measurements all the right way round, and I got all the pieces of wood exactly where I had measured them and where I wanted them to be, which is really important. So with all of that marked up, the next stage was to offer up both the miter saw and the drill press, and it's at times like these, especially when I watch this footage back as I'm editing this video, that it makes me realise how difficult some of these jobs are when you're on your own. But as you can see, I'm using the wood to sort of check that there's enough space between the inside of the strut and exactly where I've placed the miter saw, including the lead that pulls in and out. I mean, there was loads of space in there, don't get me wrong, but this precision, certainly now at the beginning of the build, is really, really important. And you can see I'm making tiny, tiny little changes, just easing it across, just to sort of fettle it in really and make sure there was enough room. And again, checking constantly with a tape measure, because the one thing this unit cannot be is wonky or off in any way. With having 2 units like this side by side, it's going to make it very, very tricky in terms of the weight distribution to make sure this is all in the right place. So I also got my carpenter square out there, and I was just checking and remarking to make sure that I had the right angles exactly where I should have. And obviously when I'd done the miter saw, I just exactly replicated the same thing using the drill press. The drill press is slightly unusual because obviously the weight of it is in the base, which is significantly heavy, but it does rock back and forward. I don't know if you've got a drill press, put a comment in the comments, but this one in particular is really back heavy. It doesn't take a lot for it to tip over backwards. If you've got a drill press and yours is like that, let me know. This is an Aldi Ferrex drill press, and to be honest, it's a bit naff. It doesn't really work very effectively. I have to sort of almost, kick start it myself to get it to work. But again, I went through the same process of marking it up and making sure it was exactly in the middle, and again fettling it just a little bit left right. You'll see a little shift here to make sure I had exactly the right size on both sides. And with that done, and a different camera angle, another new one, I'm spoiling you with these new camera angles in this video, I did exactly the same thing you've just seen me do. I've replicated exactly the same process, but as you can see here, this is for the upward struts as opposed to the sort of base or cross support. So same process, run them all through the table saw, knock the edges off, and then cut them down to the required size. When the struts were cut, it was just a case of offering them up, measuring them, marking them, making sure again I've got exactly the same dimensions on both of the uprights. They've got to be absolutely perfect, otherwise it's not going to be straight. And again, I used my square and I made sure every single mark I made was exactly a right angle, 45 degrees where it should be, and I checked everything at least twice. So this next stage was vital. Off camera, I'd marked the center point of these three arms, upward arms, and obviously there's one for the right, one for the left, one in the middle, and this is where I'm putting in the center point, so I know exactly where to drill the holes that the bar is going to fill through. And then I just checked each width, made sure they were all exactly the same width, and then I just put a mark in the middle of them, and I actually used my drill press to do this, which you'll see in a moment, but I was really careful on how I did this bit to get it all level. Having done all of that accurate marking, I then couldn't get my drill press to start, and it reminded me of somebody I used to know when my mum lived in Spain, whose car had one of those handles that you used to wind it up, so I have to literally flick the chuck to get it to start working, but I got there in the end. With that done and the pipe fitting, I then went through the same process to cut down some wood for the struts. When I was happy that all the wood was cut, I jumped over to the pocket hole jig and put pocket holes in all of them. This extension to my workbench is fantastic. I'll put a link in the description to this build, but really good. When that was done, I just then started hooking them together, and you can see in this footage just the difficulty you have when using stud timber. You can see there it's not straight, so you sort of have to pull the frame together when you screw it together, which is never ideal because it's going to give a little bit of buckled wood, but it wasn't too bad, but more than I would have liked. And you'll see later in the video something I didn't realise at this point, but one of these three in particular was really bowed, which gave me quite a few issues later on with the actual sort of rotation. With those outer frames done, I just put in a couple of larger CLS sort of stud supports. With those three frames created and the supports put in place, it allowed me to sort of do a dry fit. I'm just taking one of the offcut strips here from the stud timber just to sort of keep them together so they don't fall over, so it would just give me the time to sort of measure, make sure that all of those sort of struts at the bottom were placed accurately. So I just had a little bit of finagling getting this straight before I got the spirit level out, and just made sure everything was exactly as it should be and nice and level. I then started on the struts for the inner bits, the sort of, I don't know what to call it really, the sort of rotating arms that the drill and the miter saw are actually going to be attached to. And as you can see, I'm being very precise here, but this is the sort of beginning of the inner frames that are actually going to be attached via the pole. And again, I'm really taking my time making sure these measurements are right. And then the next thing I did was just mark out some lines that I was going to use to drill the hole through to connect the bars from underneath. With those lines drawn, it was just a case of drilling the holes. I've actually got the piece of base sort of supported off the ground there, so I wasn't drilling into my workbench. And then it was just a case of carefully feeding the screws through, making sure I was holding that wood in exactly the right place so that the screws were sunk into the piece of wood exactly where I planned them to be. Not easy to do on your own, but I'm pleased to say they're accurate, and when I held the board up it was perfect. And again, I just repeated the same process, drilled the holes, countersunk the holes. At this point, I was more concerned about getting everything lined up. I actually put 5 drill holes in each side, but once I got it all lined up and I made sure exactly right, I just fixed it from underneath with just a few screws to keep it nice and rigid. So when they were all locked in place, I then cut 2 pieces of wood, sort of brace pieces of wood, that were the correct size for both of these bays, because obviously the miter saw bay is slightly wider because it's a wider tool than the drill press. So I just put some double-sided tape on them, and these were literally just spacer blocks to make sure that I got that central strut, the one in the middle, in the right place. It's very difficult with that one in the middle because you've got no cross brace, which will effectively stop it until you put the sort of top on, which it's not going to have, because it's not going to have a solid top, obviously, because that's where the tools will rotate in and out. You've just got to do your best to try and keep it as level as you can, and obviously you can put lots of struts in from the back, which of course I do, but because the front is always going to be a bit wibbly wobbly because there's nothing connecting it, so I got them nice and straight and made sure it was all in the right place, and then I could start on the other side. So with the unit now laid down, I was just able to use those lines I marked earlier and put in the sort of connectors for that middle brace. Now I don't think I showed you in this bit of footage, but I did get one wrong. The one at the very top had actually split and it had gone up the inside of the wood. It had just sort of caught the edge. So I did have to take that one back out, which was quite difficult, but the rest were exactly as I'd marked them and exactly in the right order, so it secured the middle post. So with all those screws attached, this is an interesting piece of film, and you'll see exactly what I mean here. When I tip the unit over, you can see that middle bit has quite a bit of movement in it, and when I take those blocks out, I get my tape measure out and I want to check all of them. And even now you'll see, when I watch this footage back to put the video together, you can see how much play is in that middle brace just from literally measuring around it. And when I take those struts out, you can see there is a bit of movement in it. So I'm just putting the struts at the top to check it measures top and bottom, and obviously due to the nature of the fact there's not enough support at present, it's not where it should be. It should be a lot tighter than that. And that's actually something that I struggled against all the way through the build, really, is to try and keep that central bit exactly straight. Now, what I could have done was put sort of 2 right-angled sort of bits in to fix it, and that did come to my mind, but the difficulty of doing that is, of course, you risk the tool bashing into it when it's rotating around, which I didn't want. But I did check everything, and I just decided then that I was going to put another sort of spacer in and keep it in there all the time to make sure that they kept apart as much as possible. So the next thing to do with all these measurements right was to go back to the pocket jig, and these are the supports that are the sort of edges of the back of the unit. At the moment you've seen the struts in the middle, but these are the ones at the back. It's a bit easier to see from this angle, but I basically just hooked them up with a couple of clamps and fixed them in. And that bottom bar that you can see there is the very first one that I put on with the double-sided tape. So this is the sort of opposite way. This is going to be the back of the unit, which is going to be one solid unit. It's going to have a solid panel on it, not like the front, which has got the gaps for the tools to move. And I just popped on a sash clamp. You can see at the top of the picture there, and a little piece of wood. That was the piece of wood I was using as the spacer. So on this, we've now got 2 spacers on the top in both bays, as it were, and a sash clamp to make sure that the top's exactly the right size. The 2 bays are top and bottom exactly matching, and then I was able to secure the supports. I did this in a slightly different way. I secured all of these 3 sort of upward supports before I did anything else, and only when I was happy with those being straight and being where they should be did I then move on to putting the top on, which you can see now. But I'm clamping it in the right place just so that I can make sure everything is straight and accurate. And actually, this took a lot more fettling than I initially thought, because you've got a lot of uprights here. You've got this piece of wood coming across the top, which, although it is straight, there was a slight, probably 1/2 mil kink in it. And what I didn't want to do is get anything out of line, because once that's out of line, the entire sort of structural integrity of the cart is going to be absolutely lost. So I took my time here and made sure I got everything exactly where it should be before I fixed anything. When I was happy that that was all in place, I then just pre-drilled some holes and put in some screws to connect the side to the top. Now, I'm using quite long, heavy-duty screws, you can see there, and that's a deliberate thing, because a lot of the rigidity of this whole cart is going to be based on these connections from these struts across the top to the struts down the side. So I deliberately used quite hefty screws when I connected it all together. With all of those braces attached, I was really pleased with how rigid it felt, and I was very confident with how well it had been secured, particularly from the back. The next stage was to make some really accurate measurements, and again I did this 3 or 4 times, and actually wrote on the wood this time rather than on different post-its, because I had so many measurements everywhere I didn't want to get confused. So the next thing was to make some really accurate measurements of the gap so that I could start to create the inner frames that would actually attach the tools. When I'd done that, again, it was going back to the table saw, and exactly the same process, taking off the edges of the struts that I'd cut to measure the size, and then cutting up the size to make sure all of the lumber was exactly as it needed to be, and it was straight and it was the correct width. So more tape, this time for a little spacer bar, just to keep the wood off of the bottom. These are the sort of flip frames, I think is probably the best way to describe them, and I just wanted to raise them up to give a little bit of clearance between the frame and the sort of outer frame, because obviously wood, as it gets damp, has a tendency to increase in size. So I wanted to leave a little bit of a gap, and I've marked these 2 pieces of wood up, you can see there, not exactly the same. And then I put this little edging strip in, which is just one of the cut-offs from the stud timber earlier, just as a sort of spacer really. But little did I know, as I was doing this, the problems that I was about to encounter with these 2 pieces. And obviously looking at it now, you can tell, I'm sure you watching it can tell, put a comment in the comments if you can, that it was nowhere near big enough. So with all of the struts cut, everything offered up, I had it exactly as I wanted it, or so I thought, and I just put the drill in to put a little marker on the inside, and I did this through all 3 things before I went back to the bench drill. But as I said, little did I know at this point the impending disaster that was about to come. But more of that in part 2. So I hope you've enjoyed this first part of the video. Please join me for the second part next week. There is tons more in this build, including a huge mistake which you are actually watching in progress. Let me see if I can sort it out, and I'll catch you on next week's edition of the Garage Workshop. Take care, fellow woodworkers. Thanks for watching.